Good evening and welcome to the Game Line, Wales Online's live rugby debate show. My name is Matt Southgroom and I'm delighted to be joined by our rugby writer Ben James. We are streaming live to our Facebook and our YouTube channels, and this stream will also be available as a podcast if you want to catch it later on. Wales have lost then 32-9 to Ireland out in Dublin. It's their sixth defeat in a row. Pressure's coming on to Wayne Pivac. Ben, the first question. I guess, the title on this post is "Where did it go wrong for Wales?" And the first one in the chat, Dan Lewis, everywhere. Can you elaborate on anything that Dan said?
It's hard to disagree with Dan there, to be honest. Let's start with the first half. I mean, the penalty count was 10 penalties against Wales. So just a lack of discipline sort of killed us in that regards. Defensively, I didn't think we were too bad, but there were still sort of key errors at the times. Breakdown, we were still losing the collisions. The line out is a complete shambles, and it probably has been. Even before Pivac and Humphreys, you'd say, I think even in the last year of Gatland's time in charge, the line out wasn't great, but Wales didn't need to rely on the line out as much in what Gatland was doing as what Pivac's trying to do. And that's just probably exposed more. Wales are trying to make the line out an attacking platform. And when that doesn't work, Wales don't have an attacking platform. So that didn't work. Just everything, really. The aerial battle. Now, this is the third game in a row where Wales just haven't looked really at it when it comes to kicks and collecting kicks. So, yeah, I think the answer of everything is just about right.
Let's try and keep it clean in the chat if we can. I know everybody's a little bit frustrated by that. You touched on a lot of issues there, Ben. I think we can all agree that the scrum was a major problem for Wales. Seemed to be penalty after penalty. Wales never got into the game in that first half. Rhys Carey got himself on the wrong side of the referee, rightly or wrongly. Andrew Porter having a lot of joy against him, and then he got the hook, did Carey, on 39 minutes. It's always a statement if a player is replaced at halftime. What did you make of that substitution? And is that almost an admission from Wayne Pivac that he got it wrong? A lot of people before the game were saying that Carey perhaps shouldn't have started this when Wyn Jones, the superior scrummager, was probably the better call. Is this one that Pivac's going to have to take on the chin?
I think so. I think it was an admission of getting the selection wrong. I remember Mark Ring did a piece for us the other day about who he would pick to face Ireland, and he went with Rhys Carey and Rob Evans in the front row. And it felt to me that was very much a flyer half picking a front row if ever I saw it, because to me, I don't think either of them props are really renowned for their scrummage, and I think Carey showed that tonight. He got on the wrong side of Reynal when it came to binding, and yeah, I think people will probably look to have a go at Pivac for ruining the confidence of a young player. I mean, at the end of the day, Wales had a scrum 5 meters out from the line. If you identify a problem, it's probably time to change it, regardless of what the time is on the clock. But in doing so, he did acknowledge that there was something wrong with his initial selection. And I suppose that sort of feeds throughout the scrum midfield. You look at a lot of the players maybe he started in that scrum, and so it felt like a few of them were the wrong way around. I think Jake Ball should be starting games. Maybe Samson Lee or Thomas Francis. You can choose either or there. But it just feels like there's a couple of players who are maybe impact players who are starting, while the probably starting players are on the bench.
Comment coming in here from David Lee saying Wyn Jones and Samson Lee fronted up. Things certainly improved in the scrum when those three came on. Obviously, D and Samson Lee coming on a little bit later than Wyn Jones. I mean, you touched on it there. Rhys Carey is not the first and won't be the last prop to get the hook. Perhaps earlier than he might have expected. But in all seriousness, what sort of impact is this going to have on him? Because Carey was a player who came from nowhere really to get into the World Cup squad last year. Widely regarded as a fantastic player, and we all see his potential. But that's a night that may stick with him for a while.
It probably will do. I seem to remember that Adam Jones used to get taken off quite early on, but under Steve Hansen, and I don't think he was particularly enamored by that. So it's one of them things, it's tough for a prop. Of course, Adam Jones then got taken off by Gatland in his 100th cap. And he was off the Christmas card list for quite a while then. It is tough for props. but it's tough for Pivac as well, isn't it? I mean, do you effectively let Ireland have 4 or 5 scrum resets at Reece Carey there, or do you make the change, which admittedly maybe he should have made before the first whistle, but when he named the team earlier in the week? So it's tough, really. Making the change, then you are admitting that you've got your selection wrong, aren't you?
Yeah, as we've touched on, there's a lot of comments in the coming in, suggesting that Wayne Pivac's in a bit of bother here. We touched on it six in a row now. Wales look pretty aimless at the moment. It's not going well. His defence coach is gone. Should Wayne Pivac now be looking over his shoulder? This seems ridiculous that within a year of his appointment, we are talking in these terms. But is there a real danger here that Wayne Pivac could be on the chopping block?
I think, of course, there's a danger, isn't there? I think, especially since he dispensed with one of his coaches in the last week, it's probably set a bit of a ticking clock on him now, hasn't it? In terms of now he's really got to make things work because he's already got rid of someone that he's worked with for 6.5 years. What it could come down to be honest, is finances. Do the union see them losing more money over the next year or so with Six Nations finishes compared to what they'd have to pay out with compensation? Because obviously he's got a break clause next year. So if they think they can get through to next year and then, part ways at this 2-year point, maybe they'll do that. If they think it's less financially viable to do that, he may well go. We'll just have to wait and see, won't we?
We will indeed. Adam Taylor coming in with a comment saying Carey will learn from tonight massively. I think we'd all agree that it will be a massive learning curve for Reece Carey. You just hope it hasn't dented his confidence too much. A lot of people in the comment section saying that he needs to be learning his scrummaging trade at regional level. Otherwise, he leaves himself susceptible to this sort of thing. But let's not forget, he went to the World Cup last year and held his own. Interesting comment here from Nathan Long. The 10-12 axis needs to change. Bigger and Watkin offer nothing. Is that something you would go along with, Ben? Or, is there an argument that perhaps, when Wales are not playing on the front foot, it's very difficult for the fly half and his backs to look any good at all?
I mean, this is the thing. I think I saw someone tweet tonight, when 1 and 2 aren't doing too well, it's very hard to judge 3 to 15. That's probably the case for a lot of this autumn. It's been hard to judge what Dan Bigg has done in attack. Same with Owen Watkin. I think when we saw Wales click into some form of what they want the attack to be, as you say, between that 50 and 65 minute mark, it looked good. I thought Wales, Pivac, the way Pivac wants to play the game, you basically want all 15 players to be able to slot in anywhere. So Owen Watkin can come in and slot in at 10. Dan Bigger can be himself effectively what is a short ball option, like a forward would run. And then you've got people like Tipuric outside. So when you play with tempo, people can slot in and it holds the defense in different ways. I think Watkin looks, from what I've seen, looks fairly suited to that, even if it was I think he's been quietly decent in poor teams over the last 2 games. Bigger, it's always, we say we can't judge Bigger based on back foot ball, and Wales has a tendency anyway of denouncing the man who's in possession of the jersey. But I thought when Wales were going through those spells of possession, he didn't really occupy the defence as well as some fly halves might have. You think back to when this worked with Pivac. It worked because someone like Reece Patchell was a running threat from 10, so he could take on defenses and even run at them, and then Scott Williams, Hadley Parks, Jonathan Davies would step in at first receiver on the next phase. That sort of all-court game, I'm not sure it's there with Bigger. I think Bigger is a more traditional fly half. He keeps himself in the game probably by holding it, just on the back foot a little bit, giving the pass and moving around to the next phase. I'm not sure that necessarily works with what Pivac's trying to do.
I want to bring in another comment here from Kaz T. Our set piece in general looked poor. Is that down to the players or the coaches? Now, we've picked apart Reece Carey and we've talked about the line-out. We know Byron Hayward lost his job last week. One man we haven't spoken about is forwards coach Jonathan Humphreys. How much of the blame lies at his door, and should he be feeling the heat as well? I mean, we've seen what happened to the defence coach, and Wayne Pivac touched on it in the week. The attack hasn't looked particularly flash either, was what he said. Well, the line out or the scrum ain't looking great either.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree. With the line out, as I mentioned before, it's something that hasn't been great for a while. I think when we won the Grand Slam last year, we had statistically the worst line out in the Six Nations. That just goes to show how Gatland had a tendency to maybe compensate elsewhere for what the line out was or wasn't doing. In fairness to Robin McBride, the year before 2018, it was the best line out statistically in Test rugby. So it used to fluctuate a bit, and Gatland's game plan wasn't built then to live or die by the line out. I think what we're seeing with Humphreys is he's wanting to be a bit more adventurous. I think in the Six Nations, we saw him take Tipperick out of the line out and have him as a midfield option. We're still seeing that. Obviously, Tipperick's the go-to safe ball. I think when the line-out's going wrong, the first option is throw to Tipperick because that's pretty much, that's safety, that is. So that's not going well. I think we've seen in defensive line-outs, it's not quite there. And I think that comes down to coaching. I think in the Six Nations, France scored from a driving maul where Johnny McNichol was sort of defending in a 5-meter channel. You'd expect a forward. Tonight, we saw Lloyd Williams defending a guard from a maul. So it just goes to show the players are popping up maybe defensively in a lineouts where they shouldn't really be, and that probably comes down to coaching.
All right, let's try and search for one or two positives then.
I've got one.
That sort of, go on.
Well, had the original autumn schedule been on course, we'd been playing New Zealand tomorrow.
That is a positive. In the sort of 10 minutes after Lloyd Williams came onto the field, whether it was his presence or not, Wales did look and suddenly found a bit of rhythm. Ultimately, didn't cause Ireland too many problems, but I don't have the specific statistic, but that felt to me like the longest passage of play that Wales have held on to the ball for since the autumn began. Elliot D came on and hit his line out early, although one did go awry later on. Samson Lee came on, shored up the scrum. Jake Ball came on and gave Wales a bit of go forward. In that sort of 10-minute period, even though Wales didn't score, at least you could get a sense of what they were trying to achieve, which in my book is progress.
Yeah, definitely. I think, as I mentioned before, you could see what they were trying to do with the attacking game plan and the blueprint. And it probably does come down to a few factors, as you mentioned. Obviously, Jake Ball was a positive. D was a positive, hitting his line-outs. Samson Lee showing up the scrum. Wales also managed to get on top of the breakdown early on in the second half. I think they had about 4 or 5 breakdown penalties in quick succession, which kept the pressure on Ireland. They knew that they couldn't really afford to do much at the breakdown. It also gave them possession and territory. And then, going forward, I thought Lloyd was pretty quick with his service, which is he's just getting the ball away from rucks quicker, which, is interesting. I think we probably had this at times over the last couple of years. I remember the last time we were, pretty heavily defeated in Dublin 2 years ago. Gatland pretty much hung Gareth Davies out to dry, didn't he? Basically saying that the scrum halves weren't fit enough for his liking after that match. So we've been here before with this. And it's strange when you consider that a man who wasn't even on the radar of the scrum half debate at the start of the month or at the start of the autumn is now looking after this game like the man most capable of delivering Wales's game plan.
Yeah, well, let's touch on that a little bit more then. We've got a comment in here from Walter Soloway. Lloyd Williams is a lot faster getting the ball away from rucks. And then the very next one, Damian Williams, not sure if there's a relation there, maybe there is, put Lloyd at 9 and put Rhys Webb on the bench. The plan all along in this autumn was always that Lloyd Williams would come in if there was an injury and overtake Kieran Hardy. Both players were aware of that. Whether you agree with that or not is up to you. Are we realistically talking about Lloyd Williams now, a guy who, fairly or unfairly has been criticised a lot for his performances at regional level over the last few years? He's come from nowhere. Obviously, he had something like 25, 26 caps a couple of years ago. He's played at 2 World Cups. Is he now perhaps the favourite to start? I suppose against Georgia, it could be any side, couldn't it? But in a full-strength Wales 15, is he in position to start?
I think for starters against Georgia, they have to go with Kieran Hardy now. I think the way that they brought Lloyd in, which, sort of relegated Kieran Hardy to fourth choice, I think they'd have to give him, throw him a bone, so to speak, and give him the start or at least a bench spot. In terms of Lloyd moving forward, to come away from, not his last cap before the Scotland game was against Japan in 2016. So it would be some return if he could, force himself back into full on contention to start. I think it's probably too early to sort of see where I think he's going to be involved a lot simply because Wales aren't generating any form of go forward in terms of the breakdown collisions or anything. And so Lloyd helps that. I think if Wales start to fire on all cylinders, maybe Gareth Davies or Rhys Webb would be the better options, but we're not there at the minute, are we?
No, we certainly aren't. One concern, one of the concerns really to come out of that game, Jonathan Davies picked up an injury. Now, we've had some comments, I can't remember who it was, but I've seen one or two pop up asking whether or not Jonathan Davies and Dan Biggar were finished. Perhaps a bit premature that, but Jonathan Davies seemed to have an issue with his knee. We're not sure what it was yet, and we're going to speak to Wayne Pivac shortly to find out just what the gist was. But if he's got another knee problem, that's a concern, isn't it?
Absolutely, it is. I mean, he's had his fair share of knee injuries. You yourself, Matt, as someone who can appreciate injuries in rugby, given the multitude you've surely had over the years. But yeah, to barely be back really and to suffer another injury, we don't know how serious it is, but that's just a massive blow for him. Because what he needed was game time. I think people expected a lot more of Jonathan Davies in this autumn series so far, probably unfairly when you consider he's been out for a year with a serious knee injury. I think there was points after last year's World Cup where he thought, his career could be over. So, I think expecting him to be back to the Jonathan Davies of 2017 is a bit much. But certainly, this is another massive setback. But, if we're sort of, blue sky thinking and being positive and all that, it gives Nick Tompkins a chance to get back into the team. It possibly gives, Johnny Williams, you'd expect to come in for the Georgia game. He could be the sort of midfielder we're looking for, a 12, someone who can hit the line hard and carry, but also have a bit of playmaking options out the back. So it's never good to see a player injured, is it? And it's going to be tough for Jonathan Davies to sort of come back from this when we find out sort of how serious it is.
All right, let's move on towards the conclusion. And there's a lot of comments coming in. Sorry, we can't get to all of them, but we've got to shoot off soon to get to the virtual press conferences. You touched on it there. There's Nick Aaron here asking for Johnny Williams at 10. Let's look ahead to that Georgia game then. It's in a week. Wales have got just over a week to sort of lick their wounds here. What can we expect? Surely that's a game. I mean, you dread to think what might happen if Wales don't come out on the wrong side of that. But we'd expect a bit of an experimentation for that game, wouldn't we?
I think so. And it'll be interesting to see what England do to Georgia this weekend, because obviously Scotland played them a couple of weekends ago, and Georgia weren't really much cop, to be honest. And if you think back to when sort of Warren Gatland played teams like Georgia, sort of the banana skins, because of the way Gatland liked his Wales team to play largely without possession of the ball and defensively, they often got sucked into quite sort of arm wrestles against the likes of Georgia. You think back to that game where I think they nearly drew with it on a late penalty try claim late on. Maybe with a Pivac team, obviously they are very low on confidence. We can see that just from the body language, but maybe a Pivac team, a bit like a Ryan Giggs team in football taken over from Chris Coleman, is more likely to rack up the score against the lower teams, beat Italy 42-0, racked up a lot of points against the Barbarians, and then struggle in the sort of the bigger game. So it wouldn't totally shock me if Wales came out and actually did a decent job on Georgia next week, just because of where this Wales team is probably at in terms of how it approaches games compared to a Gatland team. But yeah, you'd expect some changes. I'd expect Sheedy to start, Johnny Williams. I'd give Ioan Lloyd definitely a place on the bench. And yeah, I don't know, maybe hopefully someone like Navidi can come back and we can give him some minutes before the England match. I'd be tempted maybe to try Wainwright at 8 again, like they did in the World Cup. I thought Faletau actually had a decent second half tonight. There's been a lot of criticism about Faletau, and he did look largely anonymous over the autumn, but I thought he had a decent second half. So it'd be interesting to see what they do for the Georgia game in terms of experimentation. I think there's going to be a temptation to sort of circle the wagons and get into this mindset of must-win games, which I don't think has done us much too good over the last few weeks, has it?
No, it certainly hasn't. But there we go then. Again, Wales losing 32-9 to Ireland out in Dublin. There's going to be a lot of fallout from this. Thank you very much for your comments coming in. Sorry we couldn't get to all of them. And sorry, it's a pretty short, sharp show for us this evening. But we've got to get to the press conference where we'll be speaking to head coach Wayne Pivac and captain Alan Wynne-Jones. And a few players will be out to face the media as well. You can catch all of that on Wales Online.